I'd like to welcome our next speaker, our keynote, Margaret Wheeler, or Margot. And I've learned a tremendous amount from her. And in terms of like her background, it's just unbelievable. She's the CHRO at Stitch Fix. Before that, CHRO at Lululemon, and also here at Starbucks. And every time I'm around her, I take away a nugget. We did a conference together in San Francisco for HCI. And there were people begging to ask her more questions, but because she didn't have enough time. So now we're giving her more time. And then despite the fact that she also has an injury like Dan Price and me, she still made it. So let's give her a great warm welcome. Thanks, Margot.
Thanks, David. Thank you. So nice. Okay. I'm just clomping my way over fabulously. I'm bringing fashion to the pneumatic boot. That's my goal. Hi, everybody. How are you all doing? Good. I've been sitting. Yeah. Oh, yay. Thank you. Oh, my God. That's good. That was fun. I was like, I couldn't do it because I thought something bad would happen to me with this. But I am so happy to be here with all of you. And I was sitting in the back, and then I was thinking, what do they need to hear? And I won't know it until I actually see you. Of course, I have a planned talk, so don't get too scared. But anyway, I'm so happy to be with you all today. So I wanted to start out just to kind of switch it up a little bit, because I sense we just did it felt like a little bit of a right brain, left brain, something that David just did with us there, kind of like running ourselves all over the room. But I wanted to just kind of maybe do a little reset as we go into the next part of the day. It has been such a great day. I know I have so many ideas. I can hardly remember what I'm actually supposed to talk about. Does anybody, because I'm like, oh, there was this thing, and I was talking to Katie and Preem, and we were like, oh, then that person said this, and now I'm like, what am I actually supposed to talk about? But I'll do a good job for you guys, and you'll let me know that for feedback. Anyway, but what I thought would be good just now for my own self is to do something called a clearing just for yourself. Like, it's something I learned when I was actually at Lululemon that I've just found to be super helpful, and it's just to kind of mentally, like, I would just say to close down the windows that are open in your brain. Do you ever feel like, with your computer that you have so many windows open? You may have a lot of windows open right now. So it could be a really good time for you to kind of just go in and just kind of say, is there something that's kind of preventing me from just kind of 100% fully being here? And then, just make a commitment to yourself. And it could be like a personal thing. It could be like, I'm thinking like, oh God, I've got to get through the airport in this boot again today. Okay, it's gonna be great. And then I just need to go, okay, that's gonna happen at 3 o'clock. And I'm good between now and 3 o'clock. So just take a minute and do that. And I'm gonna get my clicker, and then we'll be good to go. That felt really good. That felt good to me. Did that feel good to anybody else to do that? Yeah, it's good. So I'm going to do a clearing. So my clearing is that another one. I'm full of clearings. But I actually have had like a little bit of a thing where I'm going like, oh, I don't have like a zillion best practices like in my slides to share with you about TinyPulse. And yet I do. And so what I wanted to say is what I'm going to share with you and talk to you a little bit about this afternoon is just honestly some thoughts about creating culture, about how to think about things from only my perspective in terms of what I've learned. Because at the end of the day, what's the reason that we're all here and why would anybody ever use TinyPulse would be because you care about things like that. You actually think it makes a difference in your company to have a vibrant culture that's correct for your company, and you want to measure it and see how you're doing, and you want to be in communication with your employees. That may be oversimplifying it, but I kind of want to frame it in that context, and just know that TinyPulse is all over it. So everything that I'm going to talk to you about today has TinyPulse in it. And I also really want to make sure that we have time for questions, and I'm really happy to answer questions that have anything to do with anything I talk about, anything, really, in general, and then anything about TinyPulse specifically. So I just want to make sure that I land that for you and that you get what you need. So just to kind of start that out, I wanted to talk a little bit about the journey. So I've been with Stitch Fix, which is my current company, and many people are Stitch Fix clients, which I'm so excited about. I've met many of you, and some of you will be. We just launched Stitch Fix for men. Check it out. It's very good. Anyway, But I've been at Stitch Fix for 2 years, and in 2014, we actually started using TinyPulse, and it really was born out of us wanting to know, where were our employees at regarding our culture? Like, did they know our mission and values? We wanted to ask them about how they wanted to give and receive feedback in the company. And I had seen TinyPulse like an Inc. or Fast Company, and I had always been really curious about it. So that was the opportunity to kind of really get grounded and start using TinyPulse. Well, in 2014, we actually had just arrived at 400 employees, but that was including a lot of our stylists. So we have today over 3,000 stylists. We have 5,000 employees, we have 4 warehouses, and we have about 300-ish people who work at our headquarters that we have in San Francisco and also in Austin. So a lot has transpired over those 2 years in my experience. And so as David said, I've had an opportunity to work with companies that are at different stages of growth. And I started at Starbucks when Starbucks was sort of still not as established, but not super early. Lulu was earlier. And Stitch Fix was the earliest stage company I've ever worked with. So it's given me the opportunity to think about things and learn. And again, it's only my experience that I share with you. Because one of the things I can't stand is when you go to an HR conference and everybody tells you the thing that you're supposed to be doing, like the hot thing. Oh, nobody's doing performance reviews anymore. We're all going to stop doing that. What I really want to bring to you is to actually have you guys reflect on what's correct for your company. What's your OS as a company? What's your operating system? And do the things that are going to make sense for your company. And that includes TinyPulse. And Katie and Kareem and I were saying that, where there are things that we've heard, and I'm sure you guys would feel this way this morning, where you've been like, oh my God, I love that idea. I totally want to do that. And there are other things I know I've heard where I'm like, ooh, I don't know if I do that. Oh, that seems scary. That doesn't seem right, And that's okay, because it's about what's correct for Ascension. It's about what's correct for Dan's company. It's about what's correct for your company. So that kind of gets into developing your OS. Know who you are. And so that's one of the things that we did at Stitch Fix. We call it our OS, which is just our operating system. And we say, like, at Stitch Fix, if we did something other than fashion, personalized fashion service for men and women, we would always use this OS. Like, it would actually not change. It wouldn't change if we decided to start doing, who knows, maybe we'll go after like the payment industry or something. I'm just kidding, we're not. But, who knows? Or like we could be solving like world hunger. We would still operate from our OS. So it's supportive of what we do with our clients, and it's not tied to it completely, where we would only be able to be in the business that we're in. And one of the things that I think a lot about, and I would be curious, and I really want to get to Q&A and get into discussion with you, is a lot of times there's this conversation about, well, these things should change. And I kind of have a thought process, which is maybe they don't change that much. It's like a person. We all want to learn and grow, but it's really important for you to know what your OS is too as a human being. So just food for thought. I haven't arrived at a definitive answer about that, but I think when people sort of go like, oh, we have to change the whole thing, it's kind of interesting to sort of explore, why would we have to change the whole thing? And are there things that should always be consistent? Because people like to know what they're dealing with, right? Do you know people who are inconsistent in your personal life? Is that hard? Right. So I think as a company, you really want to know what your OS is, what your operating system is, what your destiny is, and be able to fulfill that. I think companies and organizations are like people. I've never done a horoscope chart for Stitch Fix, but I think it could be interesting to look at the day that Stitch Fix is born, if you believe in that or are interested in that, or the date of any company, because it's all there. It's all there. Your values, your culture, your mission. It's really more about an excavation as opposed, in my opinion, as an invention. Like, it's somewhere in there. It's in the founder's brain. Dan talked about that earlier, where he said, well, yeah, we had these things that we wrote down, like 2 years ago, and then when we took them out, we did this thing with what we paid people. Oh yeah, it was actually lined up. And so that's just some food for thought and some things to think about with that. So at Stitch Fix, we have 3 components to our OS, which is people, values, and leadership. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want you to think about what this is for you. But we actually talk about what we hire for, which is the standard. And then we talk about our values, which is the practice. And then we talk about our leadership, which is the future. And we are like really rigorous about training people in this, talking about this, being super explicit about it as much as we can. Are we perfect? No. When we still pulse about our mission and values, like even compared to 2014, we're still about like just over 50% of the people that could repeat it. So we still, it's like new people, we got to keep doing it. You got to tell the story over and over and over again and keep checking in. Be true to yourself. So this is another one for me that I think is interesting and very related to Tiny Pulse. When you're introducing practices, or when I've been introducing practices into any of the companies that I've had the opportunity to work with, they will either add to your culture or take away from it. So as I was sitting listening to some of the conversation about Tiny Pulse, it's like, you know what? People are going to ask for a lot of stuff. And some of it is going to be correct to do, and some of it isn't going to be correct to do based on your OS. And I feel like when I say that, I might sound harsh. I feel like I sound old-fashioned, like in the tech world, because there's a little bit of like what David was saying, like there could be a belief of entitlement. I don't actually think that that's what people want. I think people want to work for companies where they feel valued, where they feel connected, where it's more than just the perks. That's been my experience of it. But we have, for example, at Stitch Fix, we have a compensation philosophy, which is we pay to market. And people actually don't do performance increases. We benchmark to market twice a year for people in our headquarters, and then we actually go to market once a year for stylists and warehouses. People who come from companies where there's a raise every year, even if it would be less than benchmarking to market, find that to be uncomfortable. And our job is to communicate it, but actually we don't think we need to change it. And they might actually leave the company. And so I think that's kind of one of the things I wanted to put out there for you guys to be a little bit provocative, which is it's about like listening, taking feedback, adapting, growing, changing, and yet there are some things that I think you want to be steadfast in, and I admire companies that are like that, not for being tone deaf, but for knowing who they are, being able to attract the kind of people that are going to thrive in those environments, and then being able to help those people who aren't going to be happy there to go. So that's, and to go in a loving and great way. As Chip Wilson used to say, who was the founder of Lululemon, they can go be great somewhere else. So I don't say that to be a downer, but that's really true. It's like relationships, and so I'm kind of like giving the early warning, which is watch out for the kind of I'm going to keep trying and pleasing and pleasing and pleasing. It could be like the quintessential bad, boyfriend, if you will, and it never actually works out. It's just not meant to be. Okay, so be true to yourself. That's that slide. She is, and you can see in that picture. Okay, generating culture, which we've talked a bit about this morning, or actually a little bit this afternoon, is really about generating culture. So I almost feel like I need to change my title, which is Chief People and Culture Officer. Like it gives me kind of like an uncomfortable shiver, as if I'm the one who's responsible for that. And I think a few of our speakers have really touched on that. A culture cannot grow. Like you cannot grow a company from 400 to 5,000 people with having culture live only with me. And truthfully, like we have a culture club and a cross-section of people too in a culture committee, and yet it can't even live in the culture committee. Like that's, I think, what I've experienced and learned is that it is actually about having people who genuinely feel responsible for generating the culture. And there's an interesting piece about this that I learned from a teacher of mine. It's actually not consuming culture. So the opposite of generating is consuming. So thinking about that kind of like, I'm here, we want people to feel engaged, we want people to feel connected, and yet we don't want to inadvertently create a culture of consumption where it's just sort of like, feed me, give me more, it's like that crazy man-eating plant, feed me, or whatever. It's, I think that's something just to watch out for, is that there's an element of responsibility. And I think when Tiny Pulse is at its best, it is responsible. And I love that in the Axiom video where it said something about like, writing in your feedback, but with a solution. And it had, really had that element to it. But there is an element about how do you generate responsibility. Responsibility is one of our values. And so every time I get up at our all-hands meeting and I talk about Tiny Pulse and talk about things that we're seeing, I often find that the solution is actually in the people of the company. Well, if they might say like, well, I don't feel like, my manager hears me, or, whatever the case may be. There's an element of like, yes, we need to get better. We need to train managers, but actually, have you done it in a way where your voice can be heard? Have you delivered that feedback? Have you really advocated? And we really want to create people who are like that, because in my opinion and my experience and in our company, that's truthfully how people will actually grow, and that's how the culture will grow. And I get that question asked every time in boot camp when I help facilitate. People say, how are we going to keep our culture and grow so big? And it's like, you will do that, actually. Like, you actually do that. And I don't say it to be like the pat answer. It's actually the truth. I have not found another way. And so I've had a lot of experiences. I've worked in a lot of amazing companies, but when it's like when the employees are not generating the culture and the environment isn't there for people to generate the culture, it's just not going to happen. Boom. But I'll tell you something funny if I could figure out how to go backwards. So this is cute. I know I feel like I'm saying serious things to you, but I'm not. It's all good. This is all going to be great. But anyway, generating culture. So this is generating culture in our warehouses. So they build a robot out of boxes. So if anybody gets a Stitch Fix box, like they have robots. And somehow they just decided to just start building robots. I don't know why. And they don't think robots are scary. So someone who was up here before said robots are scary. So they just, this is generating culture. So one of the points about generating culture is to know the difference between culture and traditions. So this is a tradition at the warehouses to build the robots. It doesn't have to be that way in our headquarters. We don't have to build robots. Yet we could still have the same culture. We could still have the same values. So that, I think, is one of the things that I've really learned. And I've heard that before when people are saying, how do you do this when you have remote people? Like our stylists, we have 3,000 stylists. They work in their houses. How do you generate culture? And they are like the most connected. They are by far the happiest, engaged people in our company are the people who are the least connected with our headquarters physically. Super interesting, and it's because they're connected to their clients, and it's because they're connected to what the mission of the company is. They love their clients. That's what they live for, and that's what they want to do, and we're all about fostering that. So know that there can be different manifestations of your culture in different places, and what I've learned is I really believe it's the connection to what the mission is of the company and getting people who are genuinely up for that will really help create the culture. Okay. The future. One of the things I wanted to talk about with the future, it's just a really interesting thing about TinyPulse, is like when we first started with TinyPulse, we didn't know really what we were wanting to create. I mean, we had the DNA and we had the bones of the culture, the values. They were there. They were there from 2011 when Katrina Lake started the company. But we didn't really know what people would be creating in that company. We didn't know what people would appreciate about working at Stitch Fix. And it's interesting, like what we found out in the last 2 years, and we've truthfully found that out through TinyPulse, through great questions about like, why did you join? What was it that made you join Stitch Fix? Or what's your happiest memory about Stitch Fix? That's one of my favorite questions. And people wrote like really cool things. If Stitch Fix was an animal, what would it be? Is another great question. It's one of those surprising ones where you go like, what in the world are we going to find out about that, right? People get mad sometimes when they see the question. You get the tiny punch. I love the tiny punch. It's so good. I sent an email to somebody. It's called the tiny punch. Because when we first started doing it, we'd get one of those and we were like, oh my God. We'd be reeling. We didn't have wine in front of us. And anyway, but we're learning now about what's really, really important to people in the workplace. And it's actually, for us, it's about getting to try a new industry, like to break through in an industry. Like we're breaking through on retail in a way that hasn't been done before. People really like that. People like working with really smart people. People like having fun. People like feeling connected to something that's bigger, that it is about helping people be their best selves. One of the things we talk about in our company is helping our clients be their best selves, but also our people being their best selves so that they can be fully expressed. And that's what they love about us. So we've learned that through TinyPulse. And so we've been working with the team to really figure out, like, what's a great question for us to ask in addition to the happiness question on a regular cadence that truly helps us capture to see how we're doing on creating that experience. And that may be the experience that you all have as you start to move through, or for some of you who have already done that, like some people are using all the customized questions. But it just is very interesting for us, because for me, the happiness question was sort of sacred until we started talking with the team and going like, well, wait, we're not going to do away with happiness. We're actually going to add in something that we think is going to really pinpoint us, or a series of questions that will really really help us create our future. And truthfully, like one of the things we're working on that isn't in our OS that we've got to figure out is the way we work. So when you go from 400 people to 5,000 people in 2 years, it's different, right? It feels different for people. And how do we create in that environment where people still can have that sense of connection, getting to impact things, you know, how it feels when you're more of a startup, but we're bigger. And so how do you create something new and even as good? We don't have that yet in terms of the ways to work. And so that's something we're going to be adding in that we definitely want to measure, because that's the feedback we've gotten from TinyPulse. When people have shared with us, like, what's challenging is the way we're working. It's feeling slow. We're not slow. We have to figure that out. And so thank God for TinyPulse and being able to really get that, because sure, we hear that. You know, you would hear that from people anyway, and I love that conversation earlier, which is like, oh God, what if we ask people the thing we know they're talking about? I get it, because it's like, oh, that feels really horrible. And yet you know that it's there. And so to be able to bring it present and to be able to have that information is so valuable. So that's one of the things that we're looking at in the future when we think about TinyPulse is, I think two things is really, we're going to be focusing on the way we work. And then the other thing is, what's our new question that we're going to be asking over the next year? And one thing to add about that is, you know, we don't do incentives. I have strong opinions about that if anyone wants to ask me about that. I don't judge other people, but we do it more from a standpoint of we want people to want to tell us and participate. And as a leadership team, we have people metrics that are for the whole company. Just like we report on our financials, we report on this. And so that's really what we're doing. And so it's really a big initiative for us this year to really take things to the next level in the organization. All right, so I'm going to wrap up because we're like in question time, I think, already. So final thoughts. Have an OS, know who you are. That applies as a human being too, but that's another talk. Introduce processes, practices carefully that actually really are accretive to your OS and don't detract from it. Be yourself. Don't be afraid to not take suggestions, like hear the suggestions, but actually say like, that's actually not correct for us. You know, are we going to change our whole compensation structure? Sure, we should listen if people are wildly unhappy, but if it's a couple of people, and that was kind of the comment earlier about kind of like the noisiness is like being able to weed through the noisiness and stay true to yourself. So with that, I'm going to just turn it over and we can have questions, but thank you for letting me share some ruminations and food for thought. Okay.
All right, so now we'll take some questions.
Yeah, okay, great.
Two.
I'd love to know your name, too.
My name is Chad. There we go. It works. My name is Chad, and you said you had some strong opinions on why not to do incentives. I've heard companies that are doing maybe a company party or something if they have 100% participation or... So I'd love to hear your answer.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I'd be like a hypocrite if I said I don't think you should do that, because I just said I think you should do what's right for your company. I've seen that go the wrong way, is I think how I feel. So I think you just need to watch it. I know when I was at Starbucks, we were super excited about the engagement tool that we use there. And people started getting really competitive about it. And then people felt like they were forced to participate, where it would be like, we're only at 99%. You know, like we need to get these people to go in. And it's like, the energy on that for me and the employee experience doesn't, for me and for what I've experienced, feel right. You know, so I think you could do it for sure and bring awareness, but I just think I feel myself, my own experience is making it feel, it gets a little contesty, especially if you have people who love like winning, you know, like when you have, I mean, I love like people like, the people who were with Starbucks were awesome, I love it, and they were like, we're gonna sell lattes, or we're gonna make the best Frappuccino, and that's like, we're gonna win Partner View Survey, and it was like, oh, I don't know if you should do that, right? So that's my thought about it. Does that answer your question? Yes, thank you. Yeah, good, great.
So I love your energy.
Thank you.
My name's Jill. I work
Jill.
for an employee benefits firm, and I'm a health and performance consultant. So I chose to come to this event because it's not the traditional wellness conference. I think you guys are from Limeade. So my question is, I kind of know the sequence of how it should go. So two parts. So my question is, do you have a well-being initiative in place? And if so, did Tiny Pulse come first?
Oh, yeah.
And I have a feeling that you and I have similar incentive philosophies, and I'd love to talk to you about that.
Okay, good. Thank you. We are just starting a well-being initiative. So Tiny Pulse actually came first. And so when your company has a vision or mission for people that's actually about helping people be their best selves, like you can't not start to think about well-being. So this year, that's actually one of the things we're really focusing on in all of the aspects. So when you think about our company, like we're 5 years old. So when you're 5 years old, you're still introducing things like comp structures, or not, like in our regard, or comp philosophy, and just getting benefits in place. We were on an outsourced provider, like when I started at Stitch Fix, we were on TriNet. So bringing benefits in-house, 401k programs. Like we spent a lot of time and energy like getting some really good foundations. And I think a well-being program, not to say that that's not a foundation, now I feel like we're in that kind of next hierarchy of needs where we're really looking at what that could look like. And I think it's just gonna be about self-development. I think it's gonna be about health. We just started introducing a meditation series that we're super curious about. I'm intrigued about that in terms of how it's going to impact the way we work, just because I think people will be more clear, and I think it'll just be very interesting. So yeah, there's more to come on that for sure. Yeah.
Hi, my name
Hi.
is Cindy.
Hi, Cindy.
And I'm here from Seattle.
Hi.
And we actually just started pulsing about 4 or 5 months ago. And rather than having a 99% participation rate, we're probably more around 60. And I think even lower when it comes to cheers. I think there's like consistent, like 3 or 4 people who cheer. One of the things I'm trying to figure out is if incentives is not necessarily a thing, which in our company doesn't really seem to be how people operate, how do we increase and encourage participation, particularly in cheers or in providing feedback, particularly when people aren't necessarily affirmation oriented?
People are not affirmation oriented. That's so interesting.
Yeah, like I have one dev who just thinks he's like great just doing his work because he loves doing his work, and so it's not
Oh yeah.
his way to think about encouraging other people to do it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I love like diverse, not everybody's going to want to do a Cheers for Peer. I think that's okay. Like myself, like I do. I think like it could be fine, And I love them. I just got one today and I love them. I don't give them as much as I should. That's what I realized when I got one. So I guess in answer to your question, I don't know. I mean, I may be really in a different place with this, but I think as long as you're getting meaningful feedback, right? And so I think when we started out, like we said, well, we'd be happy with a goal of like 45 to 50% of participation. And then we see participation goes down if it's a question that people can't write, yes or no, or a number, and like it's and yet that's like 25%, and it's really rich. It's a really rich 25%. And so I think as long as people know and they understand, I think the other thing is do something about it. I love the idea about like brought to you by Tiny Pulse. I think that's kind of cool. I think as long as people see that something is happening with what they're doing, I think people will become more participative. My feeling about it, and this is just my opinion, is I would rather have people want to be in something rather than feel like it's a forced march. And I know you're not suggesting that. I think that's what your question is. And so I think there's just a range of like, there's awareness, there's people feeling like, hey, I'd like to do that. That's not really my thing. I think that it's going to be finding what's correct for you and kind of letting it evolve. 4 months is not that, you said 4 months? That's not that long. I know, I feel the same way though. I'm like, it's 4 months, why don't we have everything? Like in life, right? It's like, what the, but it's like 4 months. Okay, let's we don't want to be super slow to act, but like give it some time to kind of mature. Hopefully that answered your question, but I'd be happy to talk later. Good.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi.
Hopefully this is going to be a quick question. I'm just told that we're probably out of time, so
Okay.
I'll make it quick. So I think I want to challenge you here. Isn't it all about hacking the operating system?
You want to challenge me about it's about it?
Yeah, isn't all of this, what we're having this whole conversation today, about hacking the operating system for the things that are not working, right? I'm here deliberately for that, is to challenge the organization to look at how we've engaged our employees and how we've focused
Right.
on employee experience for so long, and that we have missed opportunities, and that a platform like Tiny Pulse allows us to engage in a different way and move towards an operating system that our employees can actually get excited about, right?
Right.
So,
do you feel like I didn't say that? So I'm curious to know what was missing for you so I can be
okay.
clear.
Maybe what I was hearing more was staying aligned with the operating system,
Right.
right?
Well, you have to
so
create
I heard
one.
more about like that's
Yeah.
your DNA of who you are as an organization. Why do you exist, right? Why
Yeah.
the question of why, and so that's fine, but challenging that is also part of the game here,
I
the
agree.
journey we're on, right?
I agree. And so I think
It's
it's really
just a thought,
interesting.
yeah.
I think it's an interesting question, which is what if you find that you have the wrong OS? Is that what you're saying? Which is like, oh, we woke up and we thought we had a good OS, but it turns out this is the wrong operating system for us. Like we need to go from like, what would it be from like, what are they called? Like from cougar to like white fox, you know? Like we're in the wrong operating system. So I think so, sure, like absolutely. I'm absolutely saying that. But I think you should look to see, what do I want to say? I would maybe not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I would look to see like what is there, like was something great there that went wrong? Does that make sense to you? I mean, I don't know your company. I'd love to talk to you about it. But like, was there like that kernel, that instance of something so great that took like the wrong turn in your operating system? So, it may be like, I don't want to negate the opportunity to say like, yeah, maybe you need to. But like engaging employees to me isn't creating an operating system, because what are you engaging them against? So that's what my conversation is with you guys, is really like about an operating system, is what are you actually, what's the playing field? You know, what are the rule of engagement? What's the operating system that you're operating in? And then you're going to be engaging people in what that is. That's my opinion, you know, and my thought. And if you need to do a reset on that, I think that's totally true. So does that answer your question?
Kind of, but we can talk more.
Okay, all right. It's good. No, I'm up for that. I think that's awesome. I'd love to talk more. So,
Great.
yeah, great.
Well, let's give Margot a
Thank
big
you.
round of applause. We'll get your crutch up here so you can get off stage.